Good afternoon. I think we're going to start now. Please have your chairs. Thank you very much. Excellencies, members of the podium chair of the Africa Group, Her Excellency Ambassador Nada Kruger, UNIDO Director General, Mr. Yong, and UNO Director General, Mr. Yury Fedotov, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the celebration of the Africa Industrialization Day 2019. Allow me to invite you to this follow this event in English or in French, simultaneously interpreted on the channel 3 and 4 of the headphone before you. So there's an interpretation service, channel 3 or 4, depending you would like to follow in English or in French. Is it with great enthusiasm that I would like to first say a few words about our gathering today. This gathering that is taking place, that has been initiated during the implementation of the first industrial development decade for Africa. The meaning of this celebration took birth through the UN resolution 44237 of the 22nd December 1989, more or less at the end of the first ADDA, for the purpose of mobilizing the commitment of the international community towards Africa industrialization. Since then, the African Union Commission, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and UNIDO together celebrate, in fact, lead the celebration of the Africa Industrialization Day each year on 20th of November under joint organization. The AID was first observed on November 1990. So for us, it's natural to consider the AID, the African Industrialization Day, as one of the events of the third industrial development decade for Africa for the period 2016-2025, which is a global initiative to support the industrialization of the continent or in the continent. The Africa division within the Department of Program, Partnership and Field Integration has closely collaborated with the African Union, the Economic Commission for Africa, and the UN Office of the Secretary General in New York for the organization of this event under the chosen theme of title Positioning Africa Industrialization to supply the Africa continental free trade market. The purpose of this important event is to reflect on the challenges and opportunities to accelerate Africa industrialization in a unique context marked by the AfCFTA and the third industrial development decade. We all know that having such an agreement in the continent, making the agreement the largest in the world under the WTO, cannot be done to perpetrate the type of economy we are experiencing in the continent. Commodity-dependent economy is to change how things have been happening for so long. So today, to start the program, I would like first to welcome the Director General of UNIDO, Mr. Yong, to deliver the opening remark. So, Director General, you can deliver your statement, or if you want to move, but okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Your Excellency, my good friends, Mr. Fedotov, Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a really great honor to welcome all of you to the 30th celebration of Africa Industrialization Day. I'm very pleased that UNIDO is celebrating this year's Africa Industrialization Day in Vienna jointly with the Office of United Nations Secretary General and United Nations Economic Commission on Africa and Africa Union Commission. Our annual Africa Industrialization Day celebration represents a unique platform and an opportunity for us to enhance international cooperation and foster dialogues on the Pan-Africa, the African industrialization agenda. Colleagues, this year, the symposium is organized under the theme, Positioning Africa Industry to Supply the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement Market, aligned with the theme of the Africa Union's Africa Industrialization Week in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Over the years, the UNIDO developing, operationalizing, and leading the implementation of the third industrial development decade for Africa. And we now have a vision that places Africa on a path towards inclusive and sustainable industrial development. With our member states welcoming our program for country partnership as UNIDO's innovative and unique model for the accelerating ISRD, we have an established foundation to further support industrialization in Africa. With the strong leadership of the respective governments, we are making the PCP approach work for sustainable development to benefit all. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement provides a platform and a new impetus to the continent's industrialization agenda through the increased intra-Africa trade. Once operational, the free trade area will cover a market of over 1.2 billion population and is expected to generate GDP to the tune of the 2.5 trillion US dollar. With 55 members of the African Union, the AfCFTA will be the world's largest trade agreement. And this area will be largest free trade areas in the world. The AfCFTA is indeed a golden opportunity to make optimal use of the regional market, develop local and regional value chains to produce products according to international standards. And a collective response is critical in order to strive in the internationally competitive environment. By strengthening country-specific and regional comparative advantages in terms of resources, information, knowledge, skills, and institutions, Africa can emerge as a strong industrial power in the near future. And regionally coordinated initiatives supported by strong political will can help optimize usage of the continent's resources to create a strong infrastructure base and foster manufacturing. For example, the transboundary renewable energy potentials stemming from the sources such as hydro and solar in Africa is enormous and can lead to the development of the value chains and fuel industrialization, trade, and progress. Regional cooperation within the framework of AfCFTA can exploit the huge reservoir of potential resources to create sustainable industrial development and effective means to foster transformative change towards greater manufacturing value added and regional integration. The fourth industrial revolution will play a major role. Digitalization offers opportunities to African countries in terms of the facilitation of trade and the private sector investment to foster growth and create jobs. Colleagues, friends, Secretary General Antonio Guterres' initiative of the Decade of Action for 2030 Sustainable Development Goals will give us another push, another drive to support Africa industrialization. And UNIDO's joint declaration being adopted at Abu Dhabi General Conference, 18th General Conference, give us very clear guidance. Support multilateralism and work together closer with the private sector, and also to promote the technologies related to the new industrial revolution to support our member countries. This is a very, very important job for UNIDO, and to support our countries, especially least developed countries and African countries, Asian countries, etc. In this regard, we need to strengthen the regional industrial innovation system when the positioning African industry in the context of AfCFTA. In the ideal industrial innovation system, institutions will generate new knowledge to be utilized by laboratories and commercialized by a dynamic private sector. If such an effective innovation system could be created regionally by virtue of the AfCFTA, it would serve as an accelerator towards ISID, towards job creation, income generation, and move African continent to another level of economic growth stage. Continuous improvement of the products and the production systems, maintaining price competitiveness, identification of niche products, exploiting comparative advantages, turning them into the competitive advantage, retraining of the workers will apply ICT, while applying ICT and digital technologies are possible options, both in terms of policy and also economic practice. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, Africa is emerging as a continent of a whole opportunity and transformation, as committed by all the leaders of the 55 countries. I'm sure the deliberations of distinguished participants and the interactions during this symposium will highlight emerging opportunities for the positioning African industry and in the context of the newly created AfCFTA. Colleagues, friends, in conclusion, I thank our partners, especially African Union Commission, UNECA, for the good cooperation, and also my very close friend, Mr. Fedotov, work together to support African industrialization. And thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General, for your opening remarks. Allow me now to invite the Director General of the United Nations Office in Vienna, Mr. Yury Fedotov, to deliver a message from the UNSG. You have the floor. Thank you.
My dear friend, Director General Yong, Madam Chair of the African Group, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to join you on Africa Industrialization Day. On this occasion, the UN Secretary General has asked me to share with you the following message. Industrial development is of critical importance for sustained and inclusive economic growth in African countries. This year's Africa Industrialization Day marks a milestone as we highlight how the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will boost regional economic transformation and sustainable development. Africa's manufacturing has been growing faster than the world average, but this pace needs to gain even more speed. With the new trade agreements ushering in a market of the last $3 trillion and a consumer base of more than 1.3 billion people, Africa's manufacturing sector is projected to double in size by 2025 and create millions of jobs. I call on African countries to adopt a holistic approach to industrial policy, pursuing through stronger multi-stakeholder partnership, green and clean industrialization strategies that promote equitable economic opportunities and take into account the urgency of addressing the climate crisis. The third industrial decade for Africa proclaimed by the General Assembly shows the commitment of the international community to Africa's path towards sustainable development. The United Nations remains strongly committed to accelerating these efforts and to working with Africa to achieve the goals of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union's Agenda 2063. Antonio Guterres. I join the Secretary General in reaffirming our commitment to supporting a peaceful and prosperous Africa. I thank you.
Thank you, Director General, for delivering the message on behalf of the SG. I would like now to invite the chair of the Africa Group, Her Excellency Ambassador Nadia Kruger, to deliver the joint statement of the African Union Commission, UNIDO, and UNECA for this year's celebration of the Africa Industrialization Day. Excellency, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Djemba. Mr. Fedotov, Director General Yong, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. We have already heard from Mr. Djemba today the background of why we are celebrating the Africa Industrialization Day today. It was adopted by the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union Organization on 26 July 1989 in Addis Ababa and reaffirmed by the General Assembly Resolution 44237 of 22 December 1989. This year's celebration provides us a renewed opportunity to reaffirm the commitments of the African Union member states and the international community towards accelerating the inclusive and sustainable industrial development of the African continent under the theme, Positioning African Industry to Supply the African Continental Free Trade Agreement Market. This year's theme for the aid builds upon the positive outcomes of the inaugural 2018 African Industrialization Week. The choice of the theme could not have been by coincidence, particularly given that it comes hard on the heels of the successful launch of the operational phase of the Continental Free Trade Agreement on 7 July 2019 at the Extraordinary Summit of the African Union Heads of State and Government in Niamey, Niger. Thus, with free trade dawning on 1 July 2020, the need to reposition industrial production to enhance the supply response to the enlarged Pan-African market requires reprioritization of the program frame at member states, regional and international levels. With the free trade agreement ushering in a huge regional market potential to the tune of, as we have heard, almost $3 trillion and a consumer base of 1.27 billion, the agreement is a timely and adequate initiative to augment Africa's collective response to withstand global competitive pressures for efficiency gains. The Africa Industrialization Day 2019 therefore presents us a very important occasion to raise awareness of the industrialization challenges and strides being made on structural transformation on the African continent. This is also an opportunity for stakeholders to share ideas and best practices and foster regional, continental, and global cooperation for accelerated industrialization in Africa. If the continent is to fully realize the benefits of an effective and functioning continental free trade agreement, new industrialization needs should feature prominently in our development agenda at the continental, regional, and member states levels. And response to seize opportunities calls for a review of the continent's pattern of production with a view to accelerate modern industrial applications of Africa's resource endowments. The geographical expansion of commodity belts through value addition, benefiting from the new ingredients of industrial modernization available across countries, could indeed be an effective means to climb the ladder of value addition. By promoting intra-Africa trade, this agreement is expected to nurture a more competitive and diversified manufacturing sector. The removal of tariffs will create a continental market that allows companies to benefit from economies of scale. The success of the free trade agreement in increasing the supply response hinges largely on the continent's determined efforts to remove supply-side rigidities and infrastructural bottlenecks to reduce significantly the cost of production and the cost of doing business across borders. The effective participation of all groups, especially women and the youth, in line with the demographic composition of the continent, will be key if the continent intends to reap the full benefits of this Pan-African Free Trade Agreement. To ensure the sustainability and effective implementation of the agreement, Africa must diversify its economies and production to boost trade among our member states, remaining mindful of the need to absorb the bulging youthful population and to embrace gender mainstreaming. Therefore, African countries are called upon to deploy their energies towards implementing the ancillary yet strategic activities during the intervening period leading up to the 1st of July 2020, when formal free trade commences, to ensure a seamless transition towards the free trade agreement. Given the urgency to boost the industry's capacity to supply the continental free trade agreement market, this year's celebrations will also focus on exploring tools and business instruments that strengthen industry's capacity to anchor on the continent as they seek to exploit scale economies ushered in by the Pan-African Free Trade regime. The African Union's Commission has thus partnered with institutions that bring the necessary investment capital to the continent, among others the International Trade Center in Geneva, the Korea Africa Foundation, bringing in 20 startups, regional economic committees, UNIDO, UNECA, the GIZ, the Africa Export-Import Bank, the Africa Development Bank, the European Union, and Africa Free Zones Organization. This year, we have thus deliberately shifted beyond building political advocacy on the continent's industrialization and swung towards creating the platform for formal business transactions. In this regard, the promotion of domestic and foreign investment has been given prominence in the celebrations. The celebrations will be capped by the participation of more than 1,000 high-profile multi-stakeholder delegates drawn from the private sector, public sector, civil society, development partners, trade and industry think tanks. Our partnership with the Korea Africa Foundation brings life to the SMEs, with emphasis placed on the promotion of business startups, an area in which our partners, of course, have an edge on us. The sectoral profile of business startups that the Korea Africa Foundation is exhibiting includes high-tech companies, manufacturing, tourism, Medicare, the automotive industry, textiles, fertilizers, and the financial sector. Ironically, these turn out to be critical areas for Africa's economic transformation in the medium to long term. To enhance prospects for business tie-ups, B2B meetings will also feature prominently throughout the entire week. Industrialization brings about greater value addition and product diversification. It also unleashes creative capacities, including manufacturing sector's capacity for innovation, which will set the continent on the course to reconfigure its production value system and move towards self-reliance, regional value chain development, and cross-border regional production systems. Advocacy for the industrialization has been gaining remarkable momentum and traction. And in this direction, the United Nations has led a global response to reposition the industrialization pathway for the continent. The UN General Assembly 7293, adopted on 26 July 2016, proclaimed the period 2016 to 2025, as we know, as the third industrial development decade for Africa. To rally global partnerships and efforts to work collectively to drive structural transformation in Africa. IDDA 3 builds on and expands the acquis of IDDA 1, which ran from 1980 to 1990, and IDDA 2, which ran from 1993 to 2002, both of which sought to promote internal engines of growth by leveraging on Africa's wealth and natural resources to enable Africa to progressively achieve self-reliance through inclusive and sustainable industrialization. The IDDA 3 proclamation underscores the need for the continent to take urgent action to advance sustainable and inclusive industrialization as a key element of furthering value addition, economic diversification and job creation, thus reducing poverty and enhancing our continent's capacity to deliver on Agenda 2063. IDDA 3 is therefore both a timely and welcome global initiative. The successful implementation of these key frameworks requires strong partnerships and coordination with other stakeholders, including the private sector within and beyond the continent. Robust public-private partnerships with multi-stakeholders must be enhanced for investment in sustainable industrialization and for facilitating access to SMEs to business development services. Special emphasis shall be placed on agriculture infrastructure, energy, including renewable energy and energy efficiency, SME development, innovation, quality infrastructure, technology transfer, product diversification, trade capacity building, industrial policy, special economic zones, and, of course, industrial parks. The Africa Industrialization Week 2019 will therefore galvanize the support and partnerships that will help Africa address its industrialization through mobilizing regional, continental, and global capital to boost the continent's prospects to deliver structural transformation, and thus fulfill the aspirations of Agenda 2063, to build the Africa we want, while at the same time boosting the capacity to meet the SDGs by 2030. The African Union's Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, identifies the centrality of industrialization as an engine that will drive social and economic structural transformation on the continent. The AUC, UNECA, and UNIDO are therefore, through the organization of the Africa Industrialization Day and Week, with one voice calling on all stakeholders to support the sustainable and inclusive industrial development of the African continent. With these remarks, I wish all the participants and delegates an excellent and fruitful celebration of Africa Industrialization Day and Week 2019. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for this, Your Excellency, for delivering this year's AID joint statement, comprehensive statement that highlight more or less the work done, the work ahead, and calling all to join hands for strengthen partnership and to move the agenda forward. So having said this, members of the podium, thank you again for your important messages delivered today during this year's AID opening session. I would like, before we close, to invite you for a group picture to conclude our opening session. A joint picture that will be taken from there. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we continue. So before we proceed to the next part of our today's program, allow me to present to you Mrs. Selma Podanovic, our moderator, who will lead the facilitation of the session to follow on our agenda. Mrs. Podanovic is the founder and CEO of 1 Million Startup, a bit like those we want in Africa.
Yes.
Yeah? So she's also the founder and vice president of Austrian Angel Investor Association, board member of European Business Angel Network, and lead investor at Risking Tide Europe 1. Mrs. Podanovic was over 1,000 times on stage as a professional speaker, and it is my pleasure today to give her the floor one more time at this occasion of the celebration of the African Industrialization Day. Thank you. Have the floor. Thank you very much, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Djemba. I think you definitely should get an applause for leading us in this opening session. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As introduced, my name is Selma Podanovic, and I will be moderating the rest of this celebration day. We have 2 panels. There will be a coffee break in the meantime. You will have also the opportunity to speak in the meantime and also have a Q&A, and then we will have a celebration in the evening. May I ask the panelists for the first panel to join me on stage while I'm introducing your names? Please, Mr. Teixeira, Director of the Department of Agribusiness of UNIDO. His Excellency Ambassador Sakine, the Permanent Representative of the African Union in Brussels. Her Excellency Ambassador Vivian Okeke, Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations in Vienna. Ms. Margaret Kayamba, Deputy Permanent Representative and Chargé d'Affaires, Permanent Mission of Zambia to the United Nations Office and international organizations. And Ms. Nella Hengstler, the Regional Director, Africa Middle East of the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber. A warm welcome to the panelists, right? And well, let us start with the opening statement. Please just take your time, it's okay. Opening statement and a keynote by His Excellency Ambassador Sakine. Would you like to stay there? Vous voulez rester là ou bien je... Yes, please. The stage is yours.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. First of all, I would like to thank our UNIDO friends, as well as everyone involved with the organization. Thanks for organizing this important event that's brought together so many excellencies. This is a very important day for Africa because this is Africa Industrialization Day, AID. As you know, for the African Union, this is a big and large-scale event. And here I'm talking about our Agenda 2063. Now, the free trade area, of course, AfCFTA, is a lighthouse project, a milestone. And then, of course, you also have other projects that revolve around free movement of services, persons, as well as greater freedom given to business establishments. You all know that this free trade agreement, or this area, was inaugurated during a summit meeting bringing together the heads of state and government of the African Union. It was Africa at large, as well as other participants that took part in the launch of this important initiative. It's important for Africa to have a single market. Africa, of course, needs to provide greater and needs to have greater economic weight, needs to have a greater say. Well, I'm not going to talk for long, but let me just say that AfCFTA is about taking action, proactive policies. Now, everyone knows that Africa is a big market, bringing together 1.2 or 1.1 billion people. That's quite significant, of course. Now, Africa, of course, is a large market. And why is it that Africa hasn't utilized its resources to the full extent? Why is Africa still poor, or in some areas still poor? That's a big question that we all ask ourselves. But we're also very rich in other respects. So by launching AfCFTA, I think things will improve. Now, when you talk about African industrialization, you also talk about substantial investments. Then, of course, you need to boost the industrial and the agricultural sectors, as well as the services sector. And then, of course, we also need to bring down tariffs and tariff barriers. So we need to be very specific, of course. This is a region where we need to boost commerce. And I think that everyone can benefit from this. And I think that one of the reasons why we have this event is to also make recommendations afterwards. And with this, I'd like to thank you very much for having listened to me. And thanks for having come to Vienna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for these opening remarks, and especially for saying that we should be as specific as possible and really concrete on what we are doing. I would like to start the conversation and this panel on the opportunities and factors of success to catalyze industrialization on the continent with asking Mr. Teixeira what are possible factors of success for accelerating industrial expansion within the framework of AfCFTA.
Thank you, Salma. I think let me start by saying that the most critical success factor for expanded industrialization in Africa is investment, whether it is domestic private investment or foreign direct investment. But for this to happen, I think there are a long list of challenges, which includes, I think I can mention a few critical ones. This is infrastructure, which includes roads, railways, and energy. And then we have a constraint in terms of finance, which is access to finance, and access to technology, and access to market and the business environment. And the list goes on. But these challenges are, I think, in my opinion, are all known. And most of the solutions are also identified by all actors. If I have attended a couple of, several workshops on African industrialization, and then most of the actors know the challenges and also know the solutions. But also there are huge number of initiatives globally to support the expansion of industries in Africa. This includes, as my colleague mentioned, the ambassador mentioned, that they say the Africa we want, the 2063 agenda. We have IDD3, Third Industrial Development Decade of Africa, or Industrialize Africa, Feed Africa, and so on. These are, let's say, more or less homegrown initiatives. But there are also international initiatives, which include, let's say, the G20 initiative of, let's say, Compact with Africa. We have a Marshall Plan for Africa, and there are a lot of also bilateral initiatives, which includes the China-Africa investment, or even very recently, Russia-Africa, Europe-Africa, and America-Africa. And the list again goes long. And all these initiatives, there are also institutions which can support this expansion of industries in Africa, which includes the African Union, the Economic Commission for Africa, and the UN agencies, and so on. And we have also regional, let's say, economic commissions, RECs, in all parts of Africa. And this is the absence. I think most of the problems are known. If the solutions are known, and there are huge initiatives, I see that there is a problem, and that problem is, I think, coordination problem, failure in coordinating all these initiatives to address the critical problems. So the UNIDO, I think UNIDO, we have the last 4 or 5 years have tried to fill this gap of coordination failure for industrialization. We have piloted what we call program for country partnership in a few countries, including 2 countries in Africa, Ethiopia and Senegal. We have created a platform to bring in all actors to prioritize sectors and then to coordinate their activities, whether it is investment. We brought in the private sector and the public sector to come together and discuss to accelerate, let's say, the investment. Both the private sector is interested in investing. The public sector always says, look, we have an opportunity, we have provided a business environment, the private sector is not coming. So by bringing all these actors, then we have prioritized the sectors and then the areas, growth corridors, where the government has established, let's say, infrastructure and allowed the private sector to come in. And this is a very good example. Now UNIDO again has an opportunity. We have IDDA3, where UNIDO is mandated to coordinate, and there are a couple of African leaders, let's say, championing this thing. We can scale up. The one which we have done in a very narrow, in one country, to coordinate all actors for industrialization can be done through IDDA3 in regional context. The regional economic commissions can coordinate at least the regional infrastructure development, the regional business environment, so on, so that the accelerated investment happens in Africa. And this is a very good opportunity. And then with this one, I think the opportunity created by CFTA can be materialized, that it doesn't remain only an opportunity like other initiatives. Thank you, Salma.
Thank you very much. And yes, of course, please. Following up exactly on what you just said on the opportunities and the challenges, it would be wonderful if Ambassador Sakine, if you can tell us a little bit more about where we stand in regard with the AfCFTA ratification process and the milestones that have been accomplished and what is ahead of us.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for having put this question to me. Now, African Continental Free Trade Agreement has entered into force, as we all know. Of course, every area has its strengths and weaknesses. Every jurisdiction has its strengths and weaknesses. Now, the strength has already been highlighted at the summit meeting in 2019 after the signature, bringing together the representatives of heads and state of government. We have reached the number of 22. 22 was required to set up this zone. So legally speaking, this free trade agreement has entered into force. Now, of course, we need to proceed with the ratification process, as you all know. And the parliaments of the countries need to get involved. And this will allow all of us to ratify this agreement. But what is at stake is to benefit as much as possible from this free trade agreement all over the African continent. Now, there is a salient feature, of course. We need to coordinate our action accordingly. We all know that the actors, the state actors, the non-state actors, as well as organizations such as UNIDO, the EU, the UN, well, all of them, of course, are committed to supporting this free trade zone in Africa. What are we going to do specifically to make sure that the African countries have an important industrial fabric, if you like, meeting the needs of intra-African trade? Well, that is the big question. Now, of course, economic commissions are very important in terms of integration. So trade is about integration, it's about bringing down tariff barriers. So now we need to place an emphasis on these regional economic entities in order to boost industrialization as well as intra-African trade involving the regions. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we'll have a big market bringing together 55 countries. So what we need to do is we need to tell people that this free trade zone has entered into force. There's no legal obstacle anymore. Thank you.
Oui. To continue on this, the Ambassador Okeke, where do you see really the opportunities in resulting from the AfCFTA for the African continent, and where do you see really the role of Nigeria in this, and how do you want to, see forward?
Thank you very much, Selna. Excellencies, distinguished delegations, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this opportunity to be part of this esteemed panelists. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement that came into force, that was signed last this July, I must tell you that Nigeria was one of the last countries to sign on to the Continental Free Trade Area. And not because Nigeria does not recognize the benefit, as has been espoused this morning, benefit of having a Continental Free Trade Area. But we had to engage the multi-stakeholders, especially the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, to look at the benefits that will come and also these benefits. And one of the key areas that was highlighted is the issue of Nigeria maybe becoming a dumping ground for manufactured goods. And so all those indicators had to be looked at to see. But we do know that for Nigeria and for Africa in general, the African Continental Free Trade Area is the right path to take towards mobilizing for socio-economic development of Africa. Nigeria, for instance, has 200 million population. So the demographic dividend is already there, that Nigeria will be a large market for a continental free trade area. Nigeria will also be able to produce and sell to other African countries. We are already benefiting from the Economic Community of West African States, which agreement within the region, whereby most of the manufactured goods in Nigeria are easily available within the ECOWAS region. So we know that expanding the continent, the free trade area beyond the ECOWAS region will be of immense benefit to Nigeria and, of course, to Africa. Nigeria expects to use the membership to create more opportunities for small and medium-scale entrepreneurs to strive and compete in a way to create jobs. One of the key elements that we have, the problems that we have in Africa and also in Nigeria, is large youth unemployment. And we are hopeful that one of the effects of the large market and the socioeconomic development that will come out of the African Continental Free Trade Area is creation of jobs. And my government, Nigerian government, is focusing in its economic recovery and growth plan, in focusing on small and medium-term enterprises to help them to grow in order to take advantage of the futuristic view of objectives that we have with joining the Continental Free Trade Area. So I do believe that it's a good thing that has come to Africa, and it will unlock the industrialization of Africa. The World Bank Enterprise Survey of 2014 ranked Nigeria out of 127 out of 138 of the Global Competitive Index. These are the obstacles of doing business in Nigeria. And this also applies to other African countries. You have the challenges, access to finance, the power sector in Nigeria, for instance, a country of 200 million Nigerians, we are only generating about 5,000 megawatts of electricity. So there are opportunities for foreign direct investment in order to scale up the generation of power. These are one of the challenges also, and as well as an opportunity. We have the issue of corruption. The issue of corruption is very, very key within Africa. But for my government, that is one of the key goals of my government, is to tackle corruption. Because when there is corruption, the cost of production doubles because there are leakages in the financial cost of doing a project. So there is need for transparency and due process in doing business. Then, of course, we have the challenge of infrastructure, transportation costs, and informal sector practices, access to land, custom duties, and trade regulations that we know that with the Continental Free Trade Area, all these challenges could begin to be mitigated. But these are some of the obstacles that has been identified in the World Bank of the challenges and obstacles in doing business in Africa, in Nigeria, and this also is a barrier to full industrialization. But we know that for African industrialization, the African Continental Free Trade Area is the foundation for industrialization. And I want to also mention that the DG of UNIDO mentioned about multilateral cooperation. Multilateral cooperation in the sense that even though we have the Continental Free Trade Area, we need to key into the role UNIDO plays in assisting with creating the enabling environment for industrialization in Africa. Because UNIDO is seen as the SON for unlocking foreign direct investments. So we know that with the PCP program that UNIDO has, that is a step process for the rest of us Africans to work closely with UNIDO in helping to unlock the confidence from other foreign partners who will look at the fact that UNIDO is involved in helping with the the industrialization process in Africa, in program for country partnership, and be able to have the confidence to invest in Africa.
Thank you very much. Definitely a big issue, the investments, and personally have been involved in part of that work. I would like to really pass the word now to Ms. Margaret Djemba to also hear from you, your expectations, and where do you stand with the ratification, and where are your expectations for Zambia also for the, in regards to the free trade?
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor. I would like to thank the Director General, Mr. Yong, and his team, particularly those from the Africa Division, led by Mr. Victor Djemba, for the excellent work they do, and also for organizing the Africa Industrialization Day 2019. Zambia is honored to be part of this important event and appreciates the invitation to be part of this distinguished panel to briefly share Zambia's expectations from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Madam Moderator, to contribute to this discussion, my submission will cover 3 broad points. The first is on the status of signature and ratification for Zambia. Zambia signed the Africa CFTA agreement during the February 2019 Summit of Heads of State and Government. This came after the conclusion of extensive national and consultations and studies on impact assessment of the CFTA. Zambia is now currently working towards the process of ratifying the agreement. Secondly, in terms of opportunities of the Africa CFTA, the Africa CFTA seeks to combine the economies of 55 African states under a pan-African free trade area comprising 1.6 billion people in a market with a combined GDP of about $2.6 trillion to $6.4 trillion. As you may know, the African Union recognizes 8 regional economic communities which are the building blocks to the continental free trade area. For Zambia, we are a member of COMESA, SADC, and the tripartite FTA with East African Community, EAC. Currently, Zambia already trades duty-free and quota-free with the countries in the COMESA and SADC. Under the African CFTA agreement, member states will commit to progressively remove tariffs on 90% of goods from all African countries with whom they do not yet have pre-existing FTAs. This will make it easier for businesses to trade within the continent and benefit from envisaged wider market of 1.2 billion people. Therefore, for Zambia, the African CFTA will offer opportunities to do business beyond the COMESA SADC bloc. Statistics from the International Trade Center show that the COMESA SADC bloc currently accounts for about 99% of Zambia's intra-Africa trade, while countries outside this bloc account for the remaining 1%. Therefore, Central and West Africa, as well as parts of North Africa, will present new potential market opportunities for Zambia to export products once tariffs are eliminated under the African CFTA. However, in order for Zambia To meaningfully benefit from the African CFTA and access these markets, there is need to accelerate our industrialization and diversification agenda, particularly in sectors such as agriculture and manufacturing, as well as in the services sector. At present, the bulk of Zambia's exports are raw materials or agriculture products. These products are similar to products exported by other countries within the continent. This lack of complementarity and differentiation of export products may explain to a very large extent the low levels of intra-Africa trade. Therefore, for Zambia, product diversification and value addition through industrialization are critical, very key in this regard. Further, beyond diversification and industrialization, Zambia is working towards addressing the challenges related to infrastructure and logistics, which will make it easy to do business with the rest of the continent. Zambia, in the last few years, invested heavily in road infrastructure and border facilities, such as one-stop border posts, which has allowed for simplified movement of goods and services across our borders. Going forward, our view is that the development of infrastructure must be a concerted effort at continental level. Therefore, there is need to see the acceleration of investment in initiatives such as the Trans-Africa Highway Initiative, a road network connecting major cities in Africa with the aim of facilitating trade. Investment in railway infrastructure is also critical, as this mode of transport allows the movement of bulk cargo between countries. In addition to opportunities for export of Zambia products to new markets on the import side, the African CFTA will allow the importation of consumables and imports for industry, access to cheaper and better quality imports with consumers with a better quality and variety of goods and services. For producers, this will facilitate cheaper importation of imports in the production processes and also spare efficiency and innovation. My third point, very briefly, is on collaboration and leveraging on development partners. Madam Moderator, free trade offers great benefits for Zambia to diversify and grow the economy, creating jobs and raising incomes. However, to realize the potential gains, we have to go beyond simply signing and eventually ratifying the African CFTA to implementing them and promoting growth sectors. It's time we moved from the drawing board to implementation. I thank you.
Wonderful to go from the paper to the specifics of really implementation. I would like to ask you, Ms. Hengsler, about your experience in trading, doing business in Africa. How was that relationship? What is it, what you can share with us in terms of specifics?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Brodanovic. I'm very happy to be here today. I think Austria is a good example to look at how important free trade and industrialization is. If you look at Austria after the Second World War, it was basically built from scratch, and Austria has become one of the then richest countries in the world through industrialization. And another really big event in Austria's history was the joining of the EU in 1995. Austria is one of the biggest gainers from the European Union and from the free trade. And as a small, landlocked country, we are almost entirely dependent on exports and on trade. And to visualize this a little bit, 2/3 of our exports go to other EU countries, and 1/3 of that goes alone to Germany. So 6 euros out of 10 euros gained in Austria are gained via exports. So we're obviously big proponents of free trade and free trade agreements. Austria's relationship with Africa, there is not that much of a relationship. We were obviously not a colonial power. It's also a difficult market for us. Our companies are not as involved in the Austrian market as we would like them to be. To give you a few figures, last year we exported 1.8 billion euros to the whole continent of Africa. That's only 1.2% of our entire exports. So that's way beyond the potential that the African continent actually presents. On the positive side, I feel the image of Africa in the private sector, not just in Austria, but in Europe in general, I think a lot of things one can see, not just applicable to Austria, but to the European private sector, the image of Africa has changed. There is a clear move away from the image of a continent that receives development aid, is in need of aid, towards a continent that poses huge opportunities. It is the next frontier market. And Austrian companies, European companies are beginning to see that. This being said, doing business in Africa, investing in Africa, getting involved in Africa is very different for the private sector. Even more so for Austrian companies who have no colonial ties, who have little exposure to Africa, it is difficult for them to go there. So our job as the Austrian Chamber of Commerce is to introduce them to the markets, to help them, to assist them, and to promote doing business with Africa as much as we can. So the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is a great sign. It's a great story. It's a very positive image of Africa that I'm sure will also give companies the courage to increasingly look towards doing trade and also investing in Africa. Because the big hurdles are obviously importing procedures, different standards in different countries, infrastructure has been mentioned, and many more. So we very much look forward to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to be filled with life, to become operational beyond, obviously, the being signed and being enforced now. I think this will really give trade with Africa a big push. And not just trade. I think the important thing that's being talked about is investment in Africa. Because to give the unemployed youth the jobs that are needed to maintain stability and social peace and freedom are jobs. And yes, Africa will industrialize and create its own industries and its own jobs, but I think foreign investment is also an important factor. And obviously foreign investment becomes easier when you can produce goods not just for one country, which maybe in the case of Nigeria with 200 million people makes sense, but in a smaller country you will not put a factory just for that one country, but when you know you can export to a whole number of countries, maybe 54 of them. So that is very, very important. And one more point towards industrialization. So Austrian companies are mostly in the export business of machinery. It's difficult to export machinery when industrialization is low. So we're really expecting this drive of industrialization to also foster that export of machinery, which comes with transfer of know-how, which comes with building the ground for investing to build machineries in Africa, for Africa. We're also struggling with the fact that Austrian companies are very often not willing to adapt their products, their machines, to African needs and standards. There's a little bit of that doing business as usual, which doesn't really work in Africa. But the willingness to adapt products becomes much greater when the market becomes greater. So that's the free trade agreement that will hopefully help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this statement. I would like to continue the conversation with our panelists. Ongoing, really, we have seen now, you have shown and explained the issues that were there, the issues that exist, and also the fact, obviously, that after the ratification, we need to go into implementation and we need to move forward in specific actions and activities. And I would really like to hear from you if everybody on the panel or one of you would like to speak about the expectations you have towards policymakers or development partners, private sectors, to make this happen, to make this work. I don't see you, Mr. Tesero, but maybe you would like to kind of tell us more about your expectations and.
Again, I emphasize that for an African industrialization, I think two things are very important, and these are investment, whether it's foreign direct investment and domestic investment, and for this, infrastructure and business, let's say, environment are critical. What we expect that what should most of the development partners do is, I think, build synergy between themselves. This can be coordinated at the country level. It can be coordinated at the continent level. This is important. So if build synergy between the different partners, I can give you an example of one least developed country, which I have a project, I'm working there. There are about 40 bilateral and multilateral agencies working in about 100, more than 100, several hundreds for that matter, projects in the country, working mostly in overlap. The other ones, they do not start where the other ones stopped, but they overlap their activities, then minimizing the impact of all these resources in the country. So again, I emphasize that the importance of, let's say, coordination of all this support and then leveraging their development assistance for more investment flows in the country. That's what
Yes, exactly. Mr. Ambassador, if you would like to give us your thoughts.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Let me be quite frank here. Our sister from Austria has mentioned something that is very important. Africa doesn't need charity. That is very important to know. We don't want to transform Africa with colonial or post-colonial agreements. We have a situation where we do have markets and we do have potential in Africa. What we don't have is industrialization, not enough industrialization. The African Union with its partners, for instance, with the European Union, we are talking and thinking about a strong alliance for investments in order to create industrialization. But very concretely, what are we going to do? You know, is it normal today that in Africa, where we have water, where we have millions of hectares of agricultural areas, and that we import rice and corn and other foodstuffs? I don't think that this is normal. I think all the partners and all economic actors, private or otherwise, need to lose the thought that Africa hasn't changed. I think we have to transform agriculture in order to make sure that Africa can feed Africa. How can we transform primary materials otherwise and resources so that Africa gets manufactured products from somewhere else? And we have young people who want to get work. I think that we have to insist on reinforcing capacities, capacity building, but we have to industrialize Africa. For instance, let's take the Eastern Africa. There is functioning integration, there is a market that works, there's COMESA, but we need capacity reinforcement, industrial capacities to make sure that all the countries in the region can develop their industries in order to be able to transform their own resources. Let me give you an example. There's an action plan for industrialization of Africa adopted by the heads of state and which was adopted also by the United Nations. And we are now in 2019, so 11 years later, and with the exception of Senegal, and we would like, there are no other industrial parks that have been financed. So we are calling on everybody to come and invest. We are an open market. Those who come too late are going to regret it. There are many Chinese who come. Africa is open to everyone. We don't have priorities. What is a priority for us is our friends who come to invest in Africa and take that risk. So, thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Madam Ambassador.
Thank you, Serena. I just want to add to what my distinguished panelists have said regarding the fact that Africa is last economic frontier. Africa is the only continent that has the natural resources to develop, to industrialize. They do not need to go outside of Africa to get the natural resources that is needed for their economic development. And like His Excellency AU Ambassador has said, we need foreign direct investment in order to unlock that transformation. But there's one other element that I think we have to begin to consider. The fact that in Africa, the 60% of Africa is youthful population. And we take pride in saying that we have a large demography, and that is a plus for us. But it cannot be a plus if those large population are not skilled. Skilled in the right skills they need to work in the manufacturing sector, industrialization. I listened yesterday to the analysis from UNIDO on how adaptive technology, how to use for the Industry 4.0. And I saw in the graph that was shown that in Africa, it's just a few countries that are either followers in use or follower in, one country was follower in production. The rest were followers in use, and majority of that graph showed that we are laggards. We have not even woken up to industrialization. Somebody may ask me in the audience why Nigeria is champion of ECOWAS and presently we are closed our borders. We closed our borders because we want to achieve food security in production of rice. In 2016, we were importing almost 90% of the rice that we consume in Nigeria. Now we placed a ban, not ban, but allocation of foreign exchange in order to import rice. And presently, Nigeria is able to grow the rice they consume up to 40%. But what we see is that through the ECOWAS protocol of free movement of goods, people import the rice and bring it through the borders. And so the border had to be closed. So we need to tell ourselves the truth. Both the private sector, the government officials, the policymakers, are we ready to industrialize Africa? If we are ready to industrialize Africa, we have to be able to obey the rules and regulations. We have to be able to educate our young population to have the right skills in order to have that Africa that we want. In Nigeria, my country, there are 10 million children that are out of school. They are not going to school. and these are the future. These are the human capital that will drive the industrialization process. And the same story is across most countries of Africa. So we need to begin to also pay serious attention to education and reskilling and retooling of our youth, who are going to be the workforce for this industrialization that we are driving. And I want to chip in that as my own final comments. So thank you.
Thank you very much, yes. Really important statements that we just heard. I was just, if you, Ms. Kayumba, if you would like to have a final statement and take the stage.
Thank you. Everything has been said. As I said in my last statement, I think it's time to move from words into action. And we look forward to continued and enhanced collaboration with UNIDO and other development partners, not only in the programs that we've been talking about, like Program for Country Partnerships, the third industrial decade for Africa ID, forward to industrial levels that the other countries have. I would be failing in my duties if I did not thank UNIDO and this House for recognizing His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu, as an IDDA 3 champion for his efforts and commitment to promote industrialization as a tool towards socio-economic development, not only in Zambia, but also in Africa as a whole. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The final. Yes.
Thank you so much. It's a bit of a inter-panel cooperation. So, I mean, it's what the distinguished ambassadors of both the African Union and Nigeria were saying. It has been truly inspiring. And I thank you very much for your insights and for your thoughts. I just don't want to miss the opportunity, really, in one word, just to say that the EU is a great supporter of the African Union Skills Initiative aimed at developing the African Continental Qualification Framework. So, I mean, we are thinking in some sort of an African Erasmus program, you know, based specifically on education, on facilitating this intercontinental exchange between students and universities, and we are very much looking forward to continue our cooperation on this. Thank you.
That's good news. Yes, please.
My name is Ravin Saban. I want to take this opportunity to thank each of the panelists. All has been said, but still something is missing. The amount of money that you guys are talking, it's crazy. You're talking about $1 trillion. You're talking about $1 billion. Are these our money or is it paper you guys talking about? With this amount of money, you can build a whole continent. So what is missing? Is a tribalism in the country? Is it religion? Or what is lacking within the African leadership? They cannot take this cloud out and do it what they have to do. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce of Österreich, Mrs. Hengster, she said that the Austria produced the machineries that is not the standard of Africa because of the machines are here high standard. It's so difficult that somebody can over there maintain these machines. And some of the European countries are not private investors in Europeans, they are not a risk taker, and they don't go there. I have been trying so hard to get some kind of movement going on in South Sudan. It's almost impossible. The security is a huge issue down there. Now, some of the African people that I know, they are extremely well educated, but they don't want to go back because they have no job guarantee. They don't get paid enough. They cannot get the job because of the bureaucracy or because of whatever the reason, or they are different tribe, because they belong to this tribe, they cannot get a job because they are part of this tribe. Any of you can contribute this, I would appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you for the statement. I think that we will not go into the details of this discussion. I believe that, that we have the time of the first panel, and there's a lot of questions that we have here that we should be asked. I can only say from my point of view as an entrepreneur, as an investor, I see enormous potential. I love it. I want to be there. I want to be part of that new movement that we are now trying to see with the opening, with the ratification, with this trade agreement and everything that should be coming to that. With that, I would like to let you go for a coffee break, which is right-hand side here on the right. And I would like to just tell the panelists there will be interviews, and you can just use the break to give the interviews to the media crew. And a big applause to the panelists, please. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, wonderful to have you back. I know that it was an exciting discussion, and it's lovely to see how important it is for you, the networking part and exchanging the opinions and experiences. We're going to go on with the second panel. So I would kindly ask you to take the seats. And we're going to go into the second part, which is mobilizing policymakers, development partners, and the private sector to address the opportunities of the CEFTA. And for this, we have a distinguished panel, which I would happily introduce right now. We have, starting with Mr. Bernardo Casadilla Sarmiento, Director of Department of Trade, Investment, Innovation of UNIDO. Ms. Konstantina Kostova, Counselor, Delegation of the EU of the International Organizations in Vienna. Mr. Ping Liu, Director of Tariff and Trade Affairs Directorate, World Customs Organization. Mr. Mohamed Medouche, Vice President, Moroccan Association of Exporters. And Mr. Yusuf Ajibade, Senior Manager for Accounting Policy, Finance Change, and Financial Assurance Gradient Consulting, Africa. Just as a welcome and to get everybody, I would like to have an applause for the panelists. Mr. Casadilla Sarmiento, we would like to start with you, if you could address what are the UNIDO position in this context, and also what are the challenges and opportunities of CFTA?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I think I can very optimistically say that the UNIDO position is very positive. The free trade area is good news in the context of the multilateral trading system. As you know, since the financial crisis, we have not been having, on the contrary, we have been having an accumulation of bad news on trade. And the best news is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So we are very positive, and certainly we are very keen to see how we can advocate and how we can support. Certainly at the continental level, there are still several challenges that need to be tackled, coming a bit from trade, and trade is somehow the other side of the coin of industry. We need to build productive capacities. And this is something that I have been in Geneva some years. We have been always saying trade and productive capacities go hand in hand together. But we will still have some challenges, especially in relation to TBTs, trade barriers to trade, non-tariff measures, SPS measures, trade facilitations. I think there is a lot of job to be done, despite the fact that the free trade agreement will bring the decrease of tariffs, despite the fact that the agreement has an annex. I don't know if it's maybe Annex 4 that indicates how to deal with NTMs. There will be still a lot of job to be done in relation to NTMs, but also I'm already advance that UNIDO can help, because one of the ways to support the compliance with non-tariff measures is certainly quality infrastructure, trade facilitation, and the work we have been doing in supporting regional integration. Another trend that is a bit worrying is, and I think the first panel elaborated already, investment. Yeah, investment also since the financial crisis has been stagnating, and if we look before the financial crisis, there was an important increase of investment. It was investment that was very much resource-driven. It did not go to manufacturing, but it went to commodities production. So investment, I think, is a very important aspect that needs to be tackled. And just to move on to the next phase, if we look at the non-tariff measures, UNCTAD made a study that if non-tariff measures are reduced, there is a potential gain of 20 billion. The gentleman did not like too much the dance of the billions, but these are calculations, estimations that are based on factual figures that can happen if the Continental Free Trade Agreement comes into fruition. I was mentioning the third element that is worrying is what I call a new geography of production and investment, which is the fact that with the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution, with the new technology and acceleration of technology, one very important element is vanishing, which is the fact that the driver for investment was low cost of labor. So on the one hand, commodities, and the other hand, low cost of labor. And this is changing the equation, which type of investment will be going to Africa, and which type of investment can be attracted. There is a potential to attract a new type of investment that is related to more quality of investment, more what is impact investment, others call it SDGs investment, but the change of the comparative advantage is a very important change. There is a very good study recently released by the African Development Bank that indicates also that there are two very promising areas where for industrial revolution technologies can be applied, namely in agriculture and in energy. And in this regard, they have been explaining how much can be happening in this area. And this study has been showing that there are 6,500 startups were identified already using some form of 4IR technologies in Africa. And certainly that there are two technologies that are the main technologies that are happening is IoT and big data, and that Africa can have the potential to adopt technologies, but at the level of startups also produce new technologies. So I think that it is important to see that in the case of the continent, there are a number of challenges in relation to trade in the sense of NTMs, on investment, and technology is giving a challenge but also a big opportunity. The studies also show that sustainability may suffer under the free trade agreement, because if there is more trade and there is no positive policy action, the CO2 emissions may increase. So there is also a room to work there, and I think that UNIDO can very much support the tackling of this in terms of compliance and working with the IPAs, working on supporting how investment flows. There is a big problem with data, for example. We can support the data production. We can support the policy making in relation to quality infrastructure. We had a wonderful event with Ambassador Sakine in Brussels in relation to the development and formulation of the Pan-African quality infrastructure policy. And finally, I think that UNIDO also can be very specifically working on applications for this new technology. A good example is a project we have in Ghana where we are trying to apply blockchain for traceability. And these are some of the examples that we can see. As I mentioned, these are not UNIDO cases, but in agriculture there is a lot of drones that are being utilized for measuring, and also IoT for energy grid. So there is a lot of potential, a lot of room for UNIDO to contribute.
Sounds fantastic, thank you. But it is also, thank you very much for showing and telling also the examples and what is it, the work that you are doing. I would like to ask now, we'll go from a different perspective, and I would like to ask Ms. Kostova to tell us more about the European Union and the experience that you have, and also what projects do you think can make really a difference?
Thank you very much, Selma. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends. I actually came here with a long list of what the EU is specifically doing, also using all its programs and various tools to provide specific support for the implementation and of the CFTA. Since, to respect the time and also to reply specifically to your question, I'm happy to discuss these details maybe with my colleagues from the African group and see how we can take it from there. And now just to focus on what we do here in terms of projects. And I'll take a bit of my time, which is quite precious, for some publicity, to draw your attention to this edition, which has been released, prepared by UNIDO and EU, just a few days ago on the 14th of November. When both EU and UNIDO celebrated their 40 years of cooperation here in Vienna. And because the biggest part, more of the half of our cooperation is focused on Africa, it's 56% if I have to be specific. Here you'll find the list of all the projects with the specific targets and the countries involved that we support, and UNIDO, together with our partners, implements. So back to your question about the specific projects, I think, doing continental regional integration is what EU is about. So I would say that projects and programs that capitalize on partnerships between people, but also between different private sector industries, are crucial to pave the way for regional integration. In addition to this, projects who have strong cross-border dimension are also highly beneficial for advancing regional integration. So I think that tying workforce, businesses, students, we spoke about the importance and the value of education, local government officials, through cross-border cooperation projects, helps to generate, for this lack of a better word, or maybe to create a generation where regional cooperation or the reflex to make things together comes by default. So this will be a generation where hopefully we would exploit our potential would be exploited to the fullest extent, and where through partnerships, new levels of innovation, productivity and effectivity, but also mutual understanding and cultural exchanges will be ensured. We have various programs in Europe focused to this effect, but here I just want to flag the one which is named Interreg Initiative, which aims to tackle common challenges identified jointly in the border regions. In terms of specific projects, and that was the one that we presented on our event on the 14th of November, I would allow myself to remind the importance of a very successful project. This is SwitchMed 2. It is implemented in 8 different countries, among them Algeria, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco. Within this project, we created a community of stakeholders, linking similar initiatives and networks and scaling up social and eco-innovations. Lastly, to your question about how to turn policy into action, I think here is always in the eyes of the beholder, because from our experience and point of view, it's always important to keep a people and partnership-centered approach at the core of each and every program. UNIDO, by the way, has done really an excellent work in their PCPs in working with the governments to translate national policy plans into concrete actions, creating jobs and creating industrial growth. Another key element here is tangibility, because when we think about each and every stage of the project, having specific results that will make difference on the ground and will change lives potentially is of huge importance. And the project that we also presented in details on the 14th of November was the one that we do together with Ethiopia. This is providing support for the development of their leather industry, thus providing more opportunities for jobs, specifically for young people. In order to demonstrate once more the consistency of the EU approach, I would like to remind again that just a few weeks ago, European Union and its member states had the privilege, I would say, to work together with our colleagues from the group of G77 and China, tabling a resolution on the UNIDO and PCPs, which has been adopted by consensus in Abu Dhabi. And also we commend, I'll use this word, our colleagues from the African group, and supported their initiative in presenting the first ever resolution on UNIDO and IDDA 3, which you also co-sponsored. Looking very much for your questions and discussion after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, showing the examples of how the EU is working. I would like to move to Mr. Ping Liu, Director of the Tariff and Trade Affairs Department of the World Customs Organization, and really to understand more, how is the WCO positioned in the context of CFTA and supporting African countries in reinforcing their trade capacities?
Thank you, Salma. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Do appreciate this opportunity to talk about WCO work in support of the implementation or operationalization of CFTA. You might note that as in all other FTAs, there are many customs-related components that are to be found in the CFTA. If you look at the protocol in trade in goods, especially Part 3, liberalization of trade, all the annexes have relations with customs work, like dismantling of tariffs, rules of origin, custom cooperation and exchange of information, trade facilitation and transit, just to name a few. So we are all really talking about how customs can support, with its major role, the operationalization of the CFTA. That was alluded by Ambassador Ahmad Sakine. Probably we are talking about the devils that are in the details. But there are so many of them, I'll only focus on 3 of them. That is the HS, classification of goods, rules of origin, and trade facilitation. I don't want to bore you with the technical details. All experts can talk about 2.5 weeks about HS, how they classify goods. The important thing is that it is a convention we developed to classify internationally traded goods. And 211 economies apply the same basis for their customs tariff and international statistical nomenclature. Actually, all tariffs in Africa are based on the HS system. And the goal is to ensure uniform application of the HS. But it's not always the case, especially in Africa. We are looking to the uniform application of the latest version of the HS, which is 2017. But in Africa, we have many countries who are still applying the earlier versions, 2012, 2007. And that creates twofold of issues. One is that when you talk about dismantling tariffs, when you have to submit your tariff concession schedules, you have to base your schedules on the same version of the HS. Otherwise, it can complicate a lot the process, which is already complicated in terms of submission of tariff concessions. Secondly, when it comes to implementation, if countries use different versions, they will classify things differently. That will be subject to different preferential rates, which will not serve the objectives of the negotiations. So there we try to help Africa. We have decades-long capacity building activities devoted to HS. And more recently, I would like to mention that with the general support of the EU, we have launched the EU-Africa HS Continental Project that benefits everybody in the continent, the AU, customs and non-custom organization, private sector, and the RECs, the regional economic communities. So this is a multi-year project, which is very special in my area because we've been only able to pay for one-off flying in, flying out missions, but thanks to the generosity of EU, we are able to do it in a multi-year, and we can make sure that sustainable results are achieved with a goal that by 1st January 2022, all participating African countries will apply our latest version, that is the HS 2022. And so far, we've conducted more than 20 activities in countries, and it started to yield results in that 2 of them have migrated to 2017, the current version, and 1 have acceded to the HS Convention. And there are dozens of action plans that are submitted for implementation. Moving on to rules of origin. I've already covered 5 minutes already. Yeah. Very simply, origin, there are no uniform rules of origin, but the WCO developed a series of instruments to help members with the negotiation and implementation of rules of origin, which serve as the basis for the application of preferential duties, because you can only get preferential treatment if the products are originating from any African country according to certain criteria and conditions, and that's rules of origin. So you have to learn how to develop such a single system for Africa, which is not yet the case. Although the CFTA has entered into effect, the negotiations on the rules of origin have not concluded yet. So that will impede the actually operationalization of the agreement. So what we can provide is to, like we were already doing, provide capacity building activities, and has also offered to help to the AU, to give advice for the negotiations. But so far we haven't been formally invited, and the offer is still valid, and we are ready to help. Lastly, on trade facilitation, and we have the WTO trade facilitation agreement, and we have developed also a generous, a huge project which is called the MacArthur program that targets all African countries as well. So we have already 20 countries that are on board. This is also a multi-year project instead of a one-off project. Instead, in addition to trade facilitation, we also tackle issues like human resource development, custom reform and modernization, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of work has already been done, and obviously you're offering to do more to support the process. And now I would like to hear from Mr. Medouche from the private sector perspective. How do you see the process, and where do you see the challenges and the opportunities, really?
Thank you so much for your question. I would like, first of all, to express my deep gratitude to UNIDO management and staff for inviting me to attend this important gathering. This is the second international gathering that I attended last year from the 21st to the 25th of May in Busan, South Korea. I attended the African Development Bank annual meetings, and the theme of that annual meeting was the industrialization of Africa. So this is not a new topic for me. I am very familiar with it, and especially I had the chance during all my professional life to work at the African Development Bank. And if you allow me, let me just say a few words about the role of the African Development Bank in industrializing the African continent, and also its strategic partnership with UNIDO, because one of my hats in the past, I was director of the International Cooperation and Partnership of the EDB, and I was used to visit the headquarters of UNIDO here in Vienna in order to negotiate and sign partnership agreements in order to team up together with UNIDO and other partners in order to assist our regional member countries in Africa. The current chairman of the EDB has developed what he calls the high five. Enlighten Africa. Let me shift to French so I can maybe express myself much more easily.
Just wait for the translation.
Okay, donc I can speak in Arabic too, actually, but let me speak in French. No problem. Donc les
All right, now these high fives that President Azina mentioned, well, they involve the following aspects to enlighten Africa. Well, 600 million, 50% do not have access to electrical power, and that's a big challenge. How are we going to industrialize our continent if we do not have electrical power? So that's something that's very, very important. Then feeding Africa. Now, the surface area of the continent is huge. We've got rivers, we've got deserts, we've got sunshine all year round, and yet we import foodstuffs, so food security is a very important challenge for us. And that's what we are faced with on a day-to-day basis on our continent, Africa. And then the third high five is industrialization, which fits nicely with the overarching topic that we're going to discuss today and have discussed today. How are you going to transform our raw materials? How are you going to focus on agribusiness if we do not invest in industry? And then, of course, we have very much appreciated UNIDO's technical assistance granted to African countries in order to also develop small-scale industries. Right now, we are faced with a major issue. In the 1980s, due to a lack of governance or mismanagement of the development bank, well, they've basically fallen by the wayside. On an initiative of the World Bank and other financial institutions, bilateral financial institutions that I'm not going to mention today in order not to hurt them. Now, in order to finance industrialization of Africa, we need to have an institution that actually provides medium to long-term loans. Now, the Moroccan bank, for example, that has set up its offices in Western Africa and all over the place, well, they focus on retail banking. It's not a commercial bank, it's not an investment bank, it's a retail bank. So aren't we capable of showing that other approaches would be possible? UNIDO is talking about industrializing Africa. Shouldn't we actually set up an industrial development fund for the whole continent? That's the question that I ask myself. I'd like to pay tribute to a friend who's here, His Excellency, Roger Kakou, Ambassador of Côte d'Ivoire, with whom I had close contacts in Abidjan, as well as his another excellency present here. Thanks to his commitment on the 31st of October last year, well, he made sure that 125 increase of capital increase, $208 billion. And then the next high five, it was already announced ever since last year that $35 billion would be used to industrial Africa in the course of the next 10 years. That's what the Development Bank has already said. So we have no funding issues anymore. But we need promoters, we need developers, we need more industry, we need to make sure that there is no brain drain anymore. Now, when you go to Eastern Africa, you find Chinese engineers and other project managers coming from elsewhere. When you go to Mozambique, and you know that this country, that Portugal is undergoing an economic crisis, you find expats there. The same goes for Sao Tome and Principe. We call them expats in Mozambique and in Sao Tome or Angola and other countries. So, What about transfers, the remittances of the African diaspora? It's billions of dollars that we're talking about. It's 5 billion in Egypt, it's 9 billion. Or a small country in Western Africa, an archipelago 400 kilometers off the African coast, Cape Verde, and I'm the honorary consul of that country in Morocco. So the remittances of the diaspora, well, they amount for a sizable portion of the income. So you've got, of course, well, our stock exchanges don't work, unfortunately, because we need to mobilize internal resources. How are you going to fund our development? Well, debt, of course, is not the problem. I'm going to mention other numbers. Now, Africa gets $50 to $60 billion in terms of development assistance. But what about tax fraud? Tax fraud of multinational corporations, billions of dollars. A report, for example, makes mention of this. The African Union has also shed light on this, and I was involved in the drafting of this report. 1.5 years ago, UNDP was involved with the submission of this report. So we need to integrate Africa. That's the last high five element. So we've got regional economic communities. So what we need to do is to make sure that transport is facilitated. A large-scale project, for example, was a Ngombe River bridge project. So we then, of course, need to make sure that there are links between Tanger and Lagos, for example. Morocco, of course, is very much present all over the African continent. We are actually the largest investor in Western Africa, the second largest all over Africa, following South Africa. So phosphate, for example, we invest in factories in Nigeria, for example, in order to transform local fertilizers, for example. Now, in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana, we're also present. Now, before using fertilizers, for example, we need to make sure that soil is fertilized, and we need to analyze the soil. We did this for cocoa, we did this for pineapple. So we need to fertilize the soil, we need to adapt it to our crops, and that makes it possible for us to achieve tangible results. 4 tons per hectare without soil fertilizers, and this has actually led to an increase of 70 tons per hectare. So that's what we're doing. And organic crops, of course, also need to be developed, and that's what Africa is also seeing. So all of this is taking place in Africa. Now, I would like to say that apart from funding, apart from financing, the bank also catalyzes additional financial resources by means of co-financing together with other lenders, the World Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, the EU, and other important stakeholders and partners. But there is also the BRICS Bank, as well as the Chinese Development Bank and other stakeholders that Africa is involved with. So the financing problem is not a problem anymore in Africa. What we require is, of course, real entrepreneurs. We need to also make sure that there are female entrepreneurs. 50% of the population is women. We need to have more women. We need to have more young women and young men trained at our universities and abroad. And we need to prevent that there is no brain drain. And then, of course, income levels need to be adequate because obviously our salaries are too low. In Europe, for example, they make 5,000 euros, and in our country, just 500 euros. So we are not afraid. We are very, very committed. We are committed to achieving greater development in our continent. And then one more thing, something that was actually mentioned by the Minister of Education of Central African Republic last week in Tanger. I took part in a panel discussion with him, and he said the following, and I think this is a question that is relevant to all of us here. Now, dismantling 90% or I'm talking about budgetary problems. As far as Central Africa is concerned, tariff barriers make up 40%. Tariffs make up 40% of the budget, and dismantling all these tariffs, well, that would actually wreak havoc. So how are we going to offset those 43% if those tariffs fall by the wayside? Is the EU going to supply additional funds or something? In 2012, for example, we did away with tariffs as far as certain imported cars are concerned coming from the EU because we entered into a strategic partnership with the EU. So no more custom duties. But then, of course, our head of government at the time came up with a special tax that was actually higher than the tariffs. So we would have cheaper products, of course, but I'm talking about luxury products here. But in Central African Republic, how many people are going to get luxury goods or cars from Europe? So this really is a major issue that we need to solve. And then, of course, one more question that has arisen. We need to operationalize our entities and our free trade agreement. And then, of course, there are tariff-related obstacles. We talked about them. These obstacles, of course, are tremendous, and we need to help our countries overcome these issues. It's actually higher than the tariff barriers, these legal obstacles. And then, of course, our countries are facing a number of difficulties. We need to define lists of products that will be exemptions, that will be exempt. Now, the only African region that does not have any problems is ECOWAS, because there, the same tariffs as abroad are applicable. Now, last year, a 2-week workshop was organized, and I took part in this workshop. It was about the impact on the countries in the Maghreb, the impact of AfCFTA. So I'm not going to say why some countries lag behind. You know the reasons why some countries lag behind. So 2% of the GDP, 2% of the GDP if there's too little integration. So what's going on today? Why aren't we talking about these issues now? How are we going to solve issues when there's no open border between Algeria and Morocco, or Rwanda is closing its borders to Uganda? Now, we are worried, of course. We, who are private market stakeholders, if you put up barriers, how are you going to overcome them? Are you going to export goods by air, for example? What about those isolated countries? How are we going to help them get out of this? Well, how about charter flights to make sure that there is greater commerce between the countries? All of this, of course, is a problem. Now, chief negotiators, of course, bringing together our countries, of course, they meet regularly when AU meetings take place in Addis Ababa, for example. Well, they have not managed to overcome all issues, such as intellectual property rights, for example, or financial services, or insurance issues. So as far as I see things, we really have a lot of issues to overcome. Let me appeal to UNIDO, because you wanted us to come up with suggestions. Well, how about product quality and quality control? I think there's a working party that's been set up to devote its attention to this issue, and I've interacted with some UNIDO colleagues on this. I think that this is something very important, quality control. Drugs, medical drugs, for example. Well, a lot of medical drugs are imported and they're distributed in Africa. We've got food products, for example, that are past their sell-by date. That, of course, is a major issue. So that's what we need to consider. What about the health of our population? We need to protect our people from these health issues. Customs officials, of course, should come in. I know that the WCO representative sits next to me. Then, of course, corruption and a lot of other issues. And that's what I wanted to say. I could have gone on for hours on end. Thank you very much.
Obviously, so many things that need to be done and that need to be changed, a lot of knowledge that exists here. Thank you very much for giving us the perspective of the private sector. I would like to give you a moment. No, but it's okay. I mean, we got to shorten. We started later, so it's okay. And we're going to move a little bit later on this. But Yusuf Ajibade, I would like to have to know more from you. To what extent does the CFTA really count on the support of the development partners to create the required preconditions.
Good afternoon, His Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I wanted to thank you, the organizer of this event, and I'm very honored and privileged to be sitting among the distinguished panelists here today. The CFTA can rely on the development partners to create required preconditions for attracting FDI. I just wanted to pause for a moment to ask a question: why FDI is not flowing into the continent of Africa as it should be today? There are many reasons. One of the ones that is close to my heart is the narratives. There are negative narratives outside the continent of Africa. I can mention a few. Terrorism, war, diseases, and corruptions at the top of the echo. I've been in the investment world for the past 20 years, and I have a lot of investment managers as a colleague. And one of the things that prevent them in investing in Africa is purely based on the risk matrix that flash to them on the screen every now and then. I have a couple of words for UNIDO today in terms of how we move forward to change the narratives. Communication is quite key in terms of how we position Africa for foreign direct investments. UNIDO has many success stories in terms of what they've been doing in Africa, providing technical assistance. And they also have reputation. They've got good standing. They're an international organization. I would like UNIDO to be more involved and engage with the private sector, particularly the investment funds, investment industries. And I think by forming partnership and alliance with the investment world, foreign direct investment will flow easily. I'll give you an example in a moment. Our capital market, I think Mohamed just mentioned that a few minutes ago, our capital market is still at its infancy. It needs to be developed. We need the cooperation of the global capital market to enhance the technology required. And so by using UNIDO platform to engage the capital markets, recently Nigeria signed an agreement with Luxembourg Stock Exchange to improve our capital market. And I think that's the first step. And I will encourage other nationals to do the same. However, we can't do this on a nation-by-nation basis. We need an African platform where we have a capital market in which the foreign investors here on the side of the world in the Western Hemisphere can invest. Secondly, de-risking of projects and SMEs is quite important. One of my remits is bridging the gap between the investors that's looking for growth and the African SMEs that is looking for capital. It's been so challenging trying to convince foreign investors to part with their cash to invest in Africa. It's really, really, really difficult to break that barrier. And as a result, over the last 2 years, working with another part of UNIDO, we recently communicated to the member states of United Nations on the SDG Impact Investment Platform. I'll just spend a little bit of a moment on that initiative. This is going to revolutionize the way the investor think about Nigeria, about Africa, in the sense that using technical assistance to help the SMEs to be at the level at which an investors will be confident enough to say, yes, I'm ready to invest. UNIDO would have spent a significant amount of time doing that through training, financial discipline for the executives, corporate governance, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of things that UNIDO can participate to help the SMEs and medium-sized companies to be at the level in which the foreign investors can come in. Mohamed said earlier on that we have sufficient cash or funding in Africa to move forward, but I wanted to disagree slightly. There are enormous amount of projects to be done, and I think we'll still need foreign investment to get us to where we wanted to get. So de-risking is an important area in which UNIDO can leverage on and help the SMEs to get the funding required. I have a couple of other recommendations for UNIDO. Another thing that concerns investors is the adherence to the rule of law. And we all know the stories we've all heard about corruptions, malpractices, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's important that UNIDO uses expertise that they have garnered, through their experiences working across the globe to improve the quality and effectiveness of law. And I think this has to be done at the African level. Each individual country has their own prerequisites and their own peculiarity. But I think we now need to UNIDO need to take the experience they've had in all of those countries and trying to consolidate them to have an African view in terms of effectiveness of law so that we'll be able to predict. And I think this will, without a doubt, will resonate well with the investors in terms of putting their money across to Africa. Lastly, regulatory simplification is important. You ask an investment manager, I wanted to invest in Nigeria, I want to invest in Angola, I want to invest in, and just name it, part of Africa. The first thing they will ask you is, Mr. Ejibade, what regulations protect us? How do people actually, respond to regulation? Are they actually following? What sort of policies do you have? Do you have governance policies? Do you, they ask you all kinds of questions. At this point in time, I'm not 100% sure whether we have anything at African level. Maybe some countries like Tanzanians, Botswana, they have good governance and they're doing extremely well. And I think we need to leverage from their experiences there. So I'm reaching out to my colleague here from UNIDO to take this on board on how they can actually engage using the human capital that we have across Africa and getting people from different parts of of African countries to engage in policy debates and coming up with regulations that I believe will give the investors more confidence to move forward. I just wanted to blow the gentleman's mind away in terms of the numbers that you were asking about. I think it could triple that if the capital markets in this side of the world is ready to invest in Africa. I think our market can be even bigger. We have access to 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion people already, and we're consumers in Africa. And I believe once we have those preconditions that I've just mentioned in terms of the rule of law, in terms of regulatory simplifications, and I think, yes, I'm optimistic about the future. I think the capital market here will be ready to invest in Africa, and I just wanted to make it quite simple.
Yes. What a beautiful way to close at least this part of the panel. I would like to thank you very much, and I would like just to open the floor to one statement maybe. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. The coffee break was longer than planned. If there is anybody that... you don't have to. I mean, you had already your chance.
No. I got to say it. Thank you so much. Mr. Yusuf, you said something so important. Some of the countries in Africa, they have a picture-perfect law written. But the practicing where the problem starts. How do we solve the practicing manner of it? I mean, some of their constitution, Lord in heaven, even maybe in Austria doesn't have it. Thank you.
I will use Nigeria as an example. And I think our present administration under the President Muhammadu Buhari is an anti-corruption leader. I think it goes without saying that our judicial systems needs to be independent of our government. They are easily influenced, and I think if we separate that, legislative power, that the judicial system, just take a look at the United Kingdom. We probably have the best judicial system in the world, which is independent of the government. Nobody is above the law. And until we start exercising the same sort of independence when it comes to our judicial system, abiding by the rule of law. United Kingdom gave us a very, very good frame of judicial system. Like you said, it just haven't been applied the way it should be. And so I'm confident with the help of international organizations and having the frank discussions among ourselves. How do we really, really want to achieve this? Because the world is waiting for us, right? And so we need to get it right. We need to separate the power of the judicial system from the government so that we can execute what's in the Constitution.
Hello, my name is Flavia Insecure. I work in one of the law firms in Vienna. And my question goes to Mr. Ping Lu. He didn't mention that there are no sameness of laws in Africa, especially the uniform application of laws. So my question is, do you think until this is done, the Africa continental free trade agreement is going to be a failure? Or do you think just because the laws are not same and no uniform application that it might be a success to some point until the laws are implemented, given that implementing laws for 54 countries is not easy. It might take forever to get to the EU standard or level. Could you please elaborate more on this? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I would really ask you if you can do a quick question and then maybe more details into one-to-one, please. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, you're talking about laws, but I think you referred to rules of origin. I said that for rules of origin, there are no internationally uniform laws. Okay, the WTO tried and failed. And now when it comes to FTA, it's up to each FTA partner to decide their own rules of origin. Okay, I think the negotiators are working very hard to achieve the goal that they have, of course, extended some deadlines, but I think the entering into force of tariffs would be July next year. So I have confidence that the negotiation group will be able to come up with a single and the same set of rules of origin, which will be, of course, ideal for and the prerequisite for the application of the CFTA if you really want to deliver the desired concrete results. But failing that, you can still use their own. They can still use their own overlapping rules, and which could create a lot of problems, of course. But it will be really very, very difficult if they don't have a uniform set of rules of origin. Again, the international community is ready to help. We're already there, and we can help more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last question, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My comment is to the gentleman from...
No microphone.
Sorry. The gentleman from ASMEX, Mr. Mohammed. I don't quite share your optimism about the availability of finance, because I think one of the real problems we have is access to finance by SMEs. It doesn't help very much if you have a lot of money sitting there, and yet the people for whom that money is made cannot access it. So I'll give you an example that something that happened recently in Nigeria. The Central Bank of Nigeria had mandated the banks to loan money, to give money to SMEs, to the private sector, and told them, if you don't do it up to this time, you're going to get this penalty. They didn't, and the central bank imposed that penalty on them. The SMEs in Africa do not have collateral most of the time to access the money. This is a very big issue that we have to address. So to tell me or to tell us that there's a lot of money, there may or may not be. And I know that if we worked hard there, we could find money. But once you find that money, how do you make it such that the people who need it can access it, can have it, and borrow it, and do work? That's the issue. Thank you.
I fully agree with you about the difficulties faced by SMEs to raise funds, especially the issue of collateral that you have mentioned. The problem is that, as I mentioned in my intervention earlier, the banks that you are dealing with are retail banks. They receive short-term deposits, your salary, my salary, and they transform it. They have a multiplier coefficient of 5. They cannot go beyond that. And therefore, I was making a special call on the re-establishment of the national development banks who are dedicated to provide medium and long-term facilities. Regarding the issue of collateral, if you go and knock on the door of any commercial bank, they will ask you to bring the title deed of your house in order to get the loan. And this represents a big impediment. And when you ask yourself why these banks are asking this type of collaterals, it is because in the past, because of the bad governance, they have a huge non-performing loans. Because simply one minister has asked the general manager of that bank to give you a loan without feasibility study, without even a request. So you have also to ask, who are those SMEs who were faced with problems? Today in Nigeria, you have a very strong banking system. You have Nigerian banks that are operating outside Nigeria. You have the chance to have the Nigeria Import-Export Bank. That very few countries have this type of instrument to support the SMEs, etc. So in ECOWAS region, because your country belongs to ECOWAS, you have some multilateral guarantee funds that were established, but still they are run by public civil servants that have no clue, no experience as a private sector operator. So that's why I was saying that the private sector need to be associated even in the negotiation of this continental free trade agreement. Ask your business associations how many meetings they had with your Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is representing your country in Addis Ababa to negotiate the terms and conditions of this continental agreement. But don't forget that we had the action plan of Lagos since the 90s that has failed to achieve its goals because of lack of political will. Today, we have the chance that all our African leaders are pushing for this new free trade agreement to be a success. Of course, everybody is looking to the experience of the European Union. That was a very successful experience. But today, and I have a fear for our African continental free trade zone, with the Brexit and its implication, maybe tomorrow Nigeria will exit from this free trade because they are already closing their frontier with Benin. This is another issue. I am really afraid about that. So I'm sorry I cannot elaborate more. Maybe we can continue during a tete-a-tete meeting later on. But I fully agree with your concerns, but we have solutions. And we need to have the courage to, ownership is key. And ownership is not only from the government, but also from private sector and all the key stakeholders that we have in our continent. Thank you.
I'm very sorry we cannot continue with the questions. We're running already out of time. I would like to just to wrap up on, especially on this side of the investment. Basically, what has been said, it is the most positive news in the last decade is this agreement that we are talking about. We're moving in Africa from charity to investment. The story is how this investment coming. I can only say from my personal perspective as a business angel, there are a lot of people who are more than ready to invest for equity and not to give loans. And I think that's the way SMEs across the world are being supported, and especially in this case in Africa. It is needed for a coordinated effort to be able to do in all different segments that you have mentioned. It's all about coordination and bringing people together, working together on that. And it is about moving from paper to implementation. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panel. Please, a great applause for the panelists. I would kindly ask you if you can join us for the, in the audience for the final closing remarks. And with that, I would like to, we'll just wait for a second. Oh, a picture, I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. And just, wait, no, like yet, we have the final remarks, and for that, it is my honor to call the Director General of UNIDO, Mr. Yong, on the stage.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Happy to see you again. Firstly, please let me thank all of you for participating in our Africa Industrialization Day symposium as we bring this session to a close. We heard about Africa's developmental efforts, and distinguished speakers have illustrated the challenges, opportunities, presentations, discussions, and interventions of the day suggest that Africa's endeavor to industrialize is work in progress in which we all have a role to play. I just listened to the final part of the intervention. Very good discussion. And that also some of the issue always in my mind, how the AfCFTA will be in effect and promote trade investment in the continent and help countries moving ahead with trade benefits and also promote jobs. Those are the critical events, and also will be supported by this AfCFTA, which is so powerful for the regional integration and for the regional economic growth. Africa has already emerged as the world's most attractive investment destination, as it received $46 billion I think this is FDI in 2018 alone, despite the global financial challenges. But of course, I believe this amount is really not enough, because 55 countries in a continent and FDI, I believe that in the years to follow, it will be double, triple, and quadruple the size of existing level, because when you move, you develop, and more FDI will come. This is already proved in other continents and in the world. We have also heard how it is equally important to position Africa in the context of the new industrial era. And given the vast reservoir of the natural and human resources in the continent, the rich tacit knowledge, there are opportunities for Africa to participate effectively in the emerging innovation and value creation network. And colleagues, friends, there's a need, there's indeed one of the key dimensions of the new industrial era and the future feature of the fourth industrial revolution. Innovative technologies play an increasingly important role in upgrading the means of production, marketing, and increasing productivity. We already seen signals of Africa's effective participation in the digital world and the global value creation network, coercive policy space, effective institutional framework could prepare the ground for new digital era. And you may heard a group of leaders, they organized this group, and digital development in Africa really being actually strongly promoted, supported by the dozens of countries. This is a good sign. We could see that some countries will have the leapfrogging, and if countries can move quickly, they certainly will catch up the new industrial revolution train. On this promising context, I just would like to thank our partners and distinguished participants for your participation. And the aim was to unpack the AfCFTA, take stock of the progress to date, and identify the implications affecting the work of the development partners and the governments in the future. It is through the reinforced partnerships between government actors, development partners, financial institutions, academia, and the private sector that we can achieve ambitious targets of the global and regional development agendas. Colleagues, friends, let us make sure that African continental free trade area will soon see the dawn of a new era of industrial expansion in Africa, one that is inclusive and environmentally sustainable. We are moving ahead with industrial development, trade investment at the same time. It's green, it's sustainable. It's our mandate, inclusive and sustainable industrialization, SDG Goal 9. We are implementing this, we are supporting you, and this is Africa Industrialization Day event, but we will continue many of the events supporting Africa industrialization process. And next year, 75th years anniversary of the UN, but at the same time, I heard that lots of calling for Africa Industrialization Summit, and by leaders, for instance, like President Niger, President Madagascar, and other leaders in the continent. I think this is not a coincidence. It's not only single event. It's connected. It's connected to the historical trend. And Africa, we want 2063, 50 years transformation. So let's all support that agenda to achieve the global sustainable development goals and anti-poverty in this world. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.